got the shakes. And I had to get up and get something to eat. Because there was no way I was making it through this last video. Kielbasa, pierogies, and sauerkraut. Comfort food. I'm telling you, it's comfort food for me. I forgot sour cream, you guys. I'm irritated with myself, but that's okay. You probably clicked on this video because you saw the title and was like, huh? Probably thinking this lady has lost her mind talking about the Asylum novel. The Asylum, those state-run mental institutions that were called asylums at a time when they were thriving by the state and up and running by the state. Thriving is a weird word to use there, but you know, is a setting that is one of my favorite settings for a novel, and not from a voyeuristic point of view. One reason why, and I said in an earlier video about a month ago that I was going to do a video on this. Yes, it was a month ago, talking about the Asylum novel because and why I gravitate towards them. Novels set in the asylum. The asylums that were predominant especially in the 19th centuries, mainly until the early 2000s, when after that they really, the last lingering ones closed down in the early 2000s, I think are the perfect setting to explore themes about control and manipulation. That's why it's a setting that when I come across it in a novel, I need to get my hands on that novel or that memoir. The structure of the asylum, where you have doctors and nurses, and this is overseen by the state, are given ultimate control over a person's diagnosis treatments, is the perfect recipe. And not only that, they're really, and then when you have the patients that are completely isolated from society, not only that, it was easy to commit somebody into these asylums. Nowadays, it's harder to it's way more difficult in the United States to get somebody put into a psychiatric hold. You're 5150'd, that's what a term, 5150 to psychiatric hold, the 72-hour psychiatric hold. It takes more effort to get an adult 5150'd or put into that 72-hour hold. And from that 72-hour hold, it's determined what else is needed. Now, don't get me wrong, mental institutions still exist, psychiatric wards still exist, and they're really not a place where most people will want to be. But it's these asylums especially again, like I said, from the 19th century to the early 2000s, created the perfect recipe for how it was really easy to put somebody away because they didn't conform to societal norms. They were considered dangerous and must be rehabilitated in order to be introduced back into polite society. Individuals were committed for not every individual because they didn't fall in line. They were the odd man out. They were the black sheep of the family. You could get committed for being autistic. You could be committed for having something like ADHD. You could be committed for having the wrong aspirations. There were women who were committed, especially in the 19th century, for having seeking masculine endeavors. There was a woman who was committed because she wanted to be an engineer. There was a woman who was committed because she wanted to be a bike mechanic, and that wasn't feminine. There were women who were committed for just because her husband wanted to put her away. Women were committed could be committed for reading the wrong types of books. There were people who were committed who did have real mental illnesses, but these institutions made them worse. So one of my favorite themes in literature is the topic of control and govern these entities that will try to suppress those, to suppress the outliers into falling in line. if you dare ask a question. Think of books like Animal Farm. This theme is something that pops up in Dr. Zhivago. I love books that challenge this or shed light on it. 1984, right? And this is a microcosm of that. If this asylum setting falls under that. You can even put in the boarding school setting under this, because you have, whether that be a religious boarding school or not, where you have, say, nuns or the priests or whoever is the governing entity of that boarding school making people fall in line. Abigail by Magda Sabo, you could put under this. Jane Eyre, you could put under this. You have the woman in the attic. Gulag narratives could be put in this. Really, from this asylum setting, you have branches that could branch off. All about confinement, control, manipulation, how corrupt human beings can really become when they're given that type of authority over people who are deemed less than. That is why I'm drawn to this narrative, because I love a rebel. I love a story of the rebel. I love a story of that who is ostracized from society. I love people who are real. I love narratives of people who are really the truth speakers, but then they get demonized for being the truth speaker. That is it. So it just really fits into a study of that for me. That is why I gravitate towards the asylum narrative and memoir. I am going to do a video. This is the video of the novels that I have amassed under this setting, in case you want to dive in. Now, I have a stack. A few of them I have read. Many of them I have not. I just know that I want them on hand, and they'll always remain. I'll always keep them in my collection. And there are more that I still would like to add. So one that I don't own that I want to get is one thing. Is something that a book that most people have heard of, Girl Interrupted. It's a memoir. So I don't own Girl Interrupted quite yet, but I will add it. And one thing that as I'm reading through this stack, some of these are probably authors I don't know if they've ever come across each other. They were writing in different time periods. Again, look at the Magda Sabo with Abigail, Jane Eyre. There was another narrative that came to my mind. You can even, and this just came to me, put Harry Potter under this. They're in a boarding school with certain types of rules. Harry, even before he got to Hogwarts, he was ostracized by his family. There are a lot of parallels with how these various authors from the various time and space, time separated by time and space, are writing about these things, these overall phenomenons of human control. And in concentration camp novels, you see this as well. And it's really going down to the question of what happens when human beings are given control over other human beings because they've been categorized a certain way, and how it's addressed, particularly in literature. I have rambled a lot, but that is the setting. That is the backstory for why I have amassed these books. 2 of these books I reviewed earlier this month, so I will link those reviews below. So I've already talked about it, but Cold Nights of Childhood by Tazir Ozlu. And there are sections in this novel where the author does talk about the dehumanization that she experiences, the suppression and manipulation, and the abuse that she experiences in mental institutions. And this was originally published in Turkey in 1980 and recently published for the first time in English in 2023. And she goes over the electric shock treatments that she experienced, that she had to endure, and the abuse and the manipulation from nurses and doctors, and just how dehumanizing and just horrible those experiences were, but how she ended up getting out of those institutions. And it encompassed 5 years of this narrator's life. The author herself was also institutionalized at one point. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Again, I have a full review on this. I'm going to link it below so I don't have to rehash all of that. One that I just reviewed, the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilliam. I always forget her name. This isn't taking place in a mental institution or in an asylum. It was published in 1892, but it's taking place in a room in a large house, and with this ugly yellow wallpaper. And in a very short space of time, this narrator descends into madness. That's another reason why I'm drawn to this narrative. Certain types of environments, if you weren't crazy before, it'll force you into insanity because you've endured such horrible things. And that gives the controlling entity even more reason to say, oh, see, we knew that they were mad all along. Look how they're acting, when they're the ones who drove them to madness. They take the effect and make it the cause. And I find that to be a very interesting phenomenon that we still see today. Maybe not in this particular setting, but you see it politically, you see it socially, you can see it in families. When you're the black sheep of the family, perhaps, I think that's a good example. Let's say you're the black sheep of the family, hypothetically speaking, and you're the one who's actually sane. But there's a group of people who like, no, you're not like the rest of us. You're the crazy one. And you're gaslit and you're bullied and it makes you feel crazy. And you're like, no, but I know that I'm not. This is what a lot of these characters are also experiencing in these stories. The gaslighting, the abuse, and how the governing party, the party in authority, the group that's in authority, takes the effect and makes it the cause. This is a novel I don't hear many people talking about. I haven't read it yet. I added it to my stack last year. It's called Post-Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson. And I came across this book. I don't remember how I came across the book. I think I might have seen the cover and was like, what's that about? And I liked the graphic and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. That I can slide that right in. Now, this is actually taking place in the modern day. So the asylum is no longer a thing, but there are still mental institutions. And this in psychiatric hospitals. And Johnson herself is a lawyer. And so this story is taking place, again, I haven't read it yet, and I did listen to an interview of the author, and there was something about her that was charming, and that is what, I can't remember who did the interview. That was over a year ago. But there was something about her and how she articulated herself and how I could tell that she didn't take herself too seriously. I was like, I want to read this and eventually, and just, I know, I just feel like I would get on with this book. This was published in 2022. And so, but even though this is taking place more in the modern day, the main character, Vivian, is a lawyer who advocates for mentally ill patients in the New York City Psychiatric Hospital. Vivian herself has a bit of a traumatic past. And so she is helping mental health patients as an attorney, but she's still dealing with her own stuff. And so again, this is why I added to it. Someone of the review says it's like the bell is reminiscent of the bell jar in some ways. So I don't know if anybody has heard of this book. I don't really hear many people talking about it, but I wanted to add this to the stack. I've actually heard that it's also dryly funny. And I remember in this interview, I can't remember what the interview was. I have hair tangled up in all my piercings. She said that humor is, she prefers to use humor to get certain points across. And I'm like, I can dig it. I just thought that her interview was charming. This is a book that I have mentioned a few times. I have a full review on it and I will link it below. Faces in the Water by Janet Frame. Janet Frame, again, if you're into stories like The Bell Jar, this novel takes place entirely in an asylum, a mental institution in New Zealand. Janet Frame is considered one of New Zealand's most renowned authors, and she herself spent many years in mental institutions. She was falsely misdiagnosed, not falsely, yeah, falsely, but she was misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, and she was actually scheduled for a lobotomy. This is in the mid-20th century, and a doctor stopped her. She won an award for her writing, and right in the nick of time, she was spared. And so a lot of her fiction, well, I don't know if a lot, I've read two of her novels thus far. This novel is, it's a tough one to read, but her writing is absolutely gorgeous. And it is such a raw depiction of life in a mental institution. For you can tell that Janet Frame is pulling on her own experiences. She's unflinching in that telling, but she's also very poetic. And I think that she's underread. She had to have a place on this list. I've read this novel twice. It is excellent. I also just finished Janet Frame in particular, before I get into the other Janet Frame novel that I read. Janet Frame in particular is very blatant when she talks about themes of control and being suppressed and being manipulated so that you fall in line when there's really nothing wrong with you. You're just different, but there's nothing wrong with you. She is very blatant. Also, Janet Frame could be considered one of the first to write this type of novel. The other one that I read recently, and I finished this in September, Owls Do Cry. This was her first published novel. And this story follows 4 siblings. And one of them is institutionalized and gets a lobotomy. This novel, I thought Faces in the Water was bleak. This one, I actually got emotional reading it, and I don't usually outwardly emote while I'm reading. This was a tough read. I will review this and hopefully get that review out before the end of the year. But even though one of the siblings ends up institutionalized, there are still some things with the others. They all go through a traumatic event that shapes their adult lives. But again, Daphne is the one that ends up institutionalized. And again, Janet Frame is pulling from this theme of control, how those who are different are controlled. They don't really get the help that they need properly in these institutions. And Janet Frame uses a lot of imagery describing how they're treated like farm animals and livestock, because that's how much they're dehumanized. I couldn't do this list without the bell jar. I have a review for it on Instagram, but not on YouTube. This is a book I need to reread. I first read this book in 2020, and my review for this is very short. At the time in 2020 when I read it, I wasn't writing reviews at the length in the depth in which I write and review them now. But this book is iconic, isn't it? But again, we have a young female protagonist where Plath expertly crafts the disintegration of the main character Esther's mental health. And it's very subtle at first. And then more and more, the way that Esther sinks into this depression and how she's institutionalized. And it is quite a sad read. I bet he read this with a best friend of mine. She and I reread this together. I need to reread this. I know that my memory of it is a bit vague, so I need to reread this and do a more in-depth review, but I couldn't, because this doesn't entirely take place in the institution. There are quite a bit of New York bits in this as well. Again, a lot of these narratives talk about isolation and loneliness. You're misunderstood, you're mistreated. And if that is a theme that you do like to explore in literature, this is a setting that really highlights that type of isolation and loneliness because you're ostracized. The next books I have not read. Oh, I haven't read Post-Traumatic. So the last 4 books that I'm going to mention, I haven't read yet, but I have acquired them and I am looking forward to reading them. This is also one that's considered iconic. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Look at that cover. This has a good cover that Penguin did. This is a Penguin, but there's a Penguin Tri-Band edition that has a really cool cover. But I just felt like this cover was the most appropriate, so I had this shipped from the UK. Thank you. I appreciate it. Ooh, this one I just flipped through. Hold on. I'm really looking forward to diving into this novel. You have a crazy nurse in this story. And again, this idea of control. I Never Promised You a Rose Garden by Joanne Greenberg. You do have a main character who is diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she is suffering with schizophrenia, and she is institutionalized, but with the help of the proper psychiatrist. So in this novel, the main female protagonist gets a proper psychiatrist, and it helps to rehabilitate her in some ways. That's what I'm getting from the novel. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be some bits in it that are not tragic. And this character does have an imaginary kingdom that that is a refuge for her. And this is one that I haven't seen many people talk about as well, but I do want to read that one. The author also was institutionalized at a point, so you can consider a lot of these books are autofiction. Another novel I don't really hear too many people talking about is Insane by Reinhold Goetz. It's a German author, translated from the German. We have a psychiatrist who, I'm reading from the back here because this is interesting, to paint the portrait of the asylum as a total institution. This is what he's doing here, our author. And we follow a psychiatrist who has methods, right, that he wants to revolutionize the psychiatric field. However, when he's confronted with the realities of the psychiatric hospital, he ends up falling into madness himself. And so the book is asking questions: what is madness and who is truly mad? And I've heard that this is a difficult read. The 1 or 2 reviews I could even find of this on YouTube. There are other written reviews, but this is not one that's talked about. I've heard this is a dense read. I've heard it's a heavy read. And the images here. This is one, it's kind of bleak, isn't it? This is one that I'm waiting until I'm in the right headspace to read, because I feel like this is going to be one where I'm really going to have to focus. Some of these books, as you can tell by the material, just as I'm talking about it off the top of my head, you do have to be in the right headspace to read them. It's a heavy material, and I don't recommend picking up these lightly. You have to be in the right headspace. Some of them you have to read them, put them aside, process, and pick them up. Because, again, this isn't voyeurism. It's, I think, a part in history that people either forget about or don't realize just how it makes your brain hurt. And these are often, a lot of these authors are writing from personal experience. And I think that you have to pick them up with a certain type of respect. They're very insightful and educational. And again, they're really hitting on conversations of control and how easy it is for a group to control others. We have The Snake Pit, which this is a heavy book. It's not super thick, but the paper is thick and it feels like the paper is high quality. This is, I hadn't heard about it until recently, and I immediately got my hands on it. The Snake Pit by Mary Jane Ward. This book is also responsible for putting treatment, which was, barbaric, really, putting what life was like in these institutions to the forefront. It was the inspiration for a movie of the same name in 1948. It belongs in the same category as Cuckoo's Nest and The Bell Jar. This was originally published in the 1940s, 1946. And you have a main character that is perhaps misdiagnosed with schizophrenia and committed into a psychiatric ward or hospital in upstate New York. This is considered an autobiographical work as well. So, this cover. And I have one more, which is a memoir. Suzanne Scanlon, Committed on Meaning and Mad Women. This author in the 90s lost her mother. And of course, that grieved her greatly. And then she was committed into a New York State Psychiatric Institute after an attempt to take her own life. For 3 years, she received experimental treatments. And this is her memoir, on grief and institutionalization, and how there is there are a lot of mad women in fiction as well. So I've heard that this is a very touching and emotional read. Again, I'm going to have to be in the right mindset to. I found the bookmark to read it. I'm going to wait till I feel like it's the right time. I picked this book up in LA. It had been on my last year, about a year ago actually, of my recording this. I picked it up September of 2024. I'm recording this in September. And I picked this up at Small World Books on Venice Beach. And I saw it in person and I was like, I'm going to buy it. And so I kept the bookmark. That is a fantastic bookstore, by the way. Small World Books on Venice Beach. Venice Beach is a little unsavory, if I'm honest. I was not fond of it, but I wanted to go to this bookstore. So I was visiting one of my best friends and she drove me out there. LA is massive and LA is an hour from LA. It only took us 20 minutes to get there. It took us an hour plus to get back because traffic was so bad. So that is my list of books taking place in the setting of the institution, the mental institution, or the asylum, as they used to be called. Have you read any of these books? And please, I don't tend to prefer recommendations because I get recommendations all the time and I just can't keep up with it all. And I'm a reader that definitely marches to the beat of her own drum. I read what I want to read when I want to read it. And I have to wait for the right moment to read the book. But in this case, please add to my list here, because this is a topic that I don't think I will ever get tired of. And again, you can put the gulag. Feel free to also list things that are relevant. Gulag narratives or memoirs, boarding school narratives, prison narratives, concentration camp narratives. It's the space of confinement and claustrophobia coupled with control and demonization in a lot of ways, and mistreatment for the means of control. That is all. So yes, leave me a comment below if you have anything to add to my list, or if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book content there first. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you in the next one.